Jack Morrison woke up before the sun came up, just like he had done every day for 15 years. His small wooden house sat alone on the wide Montana plains. The nearest neighbor lived 20 miles away. Jack liked it that way. He had come to this place when he was just 22 years old, looking for a fresh start and a chance to build something with his own hands. The year was 1892, and the world was changing fast. Railroad tracks cut across the land like metal scars. More and more people came west every month, looking for land and gold and new opportunities. But out here near the Crow Reservation, time moved slower. The grass still grew tall and wild. The mountains still touched the sky with their snow-covered peaks. And Jack still lived by the old rules of the frontier. He pulled on his worn leather boots and walked to the window. Outside, the morning mist hung low over his pasture. His cattle stood quietly in groups, their breath making small clouds in the cold air. Jack counted them without thinking. 143 head of cattle. He knew each one by sight. Some had been born on his land. Others he had bought from traveling traders or neighboring ranches. Jack made coffee in an old tin pot and ate biscuits left over from the night before. He did not mind eating alone. He had learned to enjoy the quiet. In town, people talked too much and worried about things that did not matter. Out here, the only sounds were wind through grass, cattle calling to each other, and sometimes the distant howl of wolves in the mountains. After breakfast, Jack saddled his horse, a strong brown mare named Belle. She had been with him for 8 years. Belle knew the ranch as well as Jack did. She could find her way home in the dark or in a storm. Jack trusted her more than he trusted most people. The Crow Reservation started just 2 miles east of Jack's fence line. A small river marked the border between his land and theirs. Jack had seen crow hunters and families crossing the area many times. They moved quietly through the landscape, taking only what they needed, leaving no trace behind them. Jack respected that. He had grown up hearing stories about Indian raids and scalping and burning homesteads, but the Crow people he saw seemed peaceful. They minded their own business, and Jack minded his. Still, there was tension in the air. Other white settlers in the area did not trust the Native Americans. They talked about them like they were dangerous animals that might attack at any moment. Jack had heard the talk in town. Men like Ben Hayes, who owned the biggest ranch in the county, said the Indians should be moved further away from white settlements. Hayes wanted their land for his cattle. He made no secret of it. Jack tried to stay out of such arguments. He had his own problems to worry about. Cattle needed food and water. Fences needed fixing. Predators like wolves and mountain lions threatened his livestock. Winter was coming, and he needed to make sure his animals would survive the cold months ahead. He rode out to check the northern fence line, where his property bordered the forest. This was where problems usually started. Wild animals came out of the trees looking for easy meals. His cattle made tempting targets for hungry wolves or bears. Jack carried his rifle across his saddle, ready for trouble. The fence looked good. Jack had built it strong, using thick wooden posts and tight wire. He had learned the hard way that a weak fence meant lost cattle. In his early years on the ranch, he had lost dozens of animals to predators and rustlers. Now he checked every section of fence at least once a week. As he rode along the tree line, Jack thought about his life. 15 years ago, he had been a different man. Younger, angrier, full of big dreams about striking it rich and becoming famous. He had come west with nothing but a horse, a gun, and $50 in his pocket. The first winter had nearly killed him. He had no house, no cattle, no idea how to survive in the wilderness. An old trapper named Pete Williams had found Jack half frozen in a snowbank. Pete took him in, taught him how to hunt and trap and live off the land. When spring came, Pete helped Jack build his first cabin and buy his first few cattle. Pete had died 5 years later, but Jack never forgot what the old man had taught him. Work hard, keep your word, and treat the land with respect. Jack had followed that advice. He built his ranch slowly, one cow at a time, one fence post at a time. He made mistakes, but he learned from them. He faced drought and blizzards and attacks from wild animals. He survived rustlers who tried to steal his cattle and con men who tried to cheat him out of his land. Through it all, he had become stronger and wiser. Now at 37, Jack was known as one of the most successful ranchers in the territory. His cattle were healthy and well-fed. His land was profitable. Other ranchers came to him for advice. But success had not changed him much. He still woke up early, worked hard, and kept to himself. The isolation did not bother Jack, but sometimes he wondered what his life might have been like if he had made different choices. He might have married and had children. He might have stayed back east and worked in his father's store. He might have joined the army or become a lawman. But those thoughts never lasted long. This was his life, and he had chosen it freely. As the sun climbed higher, Jack finished checking the fence and turned Belle toward home. The day was warming up and there was work to do. He needed to move some cattle to a different pasture and repair a water trough that had cracked during the last cold snap. Simple tasks, but important ones. Everything on a ranch was connected. Neglect one small thing and bigger problems would follow. Jack Morrison lived a quiet life on the edge of two worlds. He respected his Crow neighbors but kept his distance. He minded his own business and expected others to do the same. He had no idea that within hours his peaceful routine would be shattered forever. He had no way of knowing that a simple act of human kindness would change everything he thought he knew about courage, friendship, and what it meant to be a good man. The next morning started like any other. Jack woke before dawn and went through his usual routine. Coffee, biscuits, and a quick look at the weather. The sky was clear and cold. October in Montana could be tricky. Some days felt like summer. Others brought the first taste of winter. Today looked like it would be somewhere in between. Jack had planned to spend the day fixing fence posts near the eastern border of his ranch. A storm the week before had knocked down several sections, and he needed to get them back up before his cattle wandered off. He loaded his tools into his saddlebags and rode out on Belle, heading toward the river that marked the edge of his property. The work was hard but familiar. Jack had fixed thousands of fence posts over the years. Dig out the old post, cut a new one to size, set it deep in the ground, and stretch the wire tight. His hands moved without thinking while his mind wandered to other things. Winter supplies he needed to buy in town. A sick cow he was watching. Whether the price of beef would stay high through the fall. By mid-morning, Jack had fixed 3 sections of fence and was feeling good about his progress. The sun had warmed the air and Belle grazed peacefully nearby while he worked. This was the kind of day Jack loved most. Clear skies, honest work, and the satisfaction of taking care of his land. That was when he heard the screaming. At first, Jack thought it might be a bird. Hawks and eagles made loud cries when they hunted, but this sound was different. Higher pitched, more desperate. And it was coming from the forest, not the sky. Jack stopped working and listened carefully. The sound came again, definitely not a bird. It sounded like a person in trouble. A young person, maybe even a child. The voice was thin and scared, calling out in words Jack could not understand. Jack dropped his tools and walked toward Belle. The screaming came again from deeper in the woods. Someone was in serious danger. Jack had lived on the frontier long enough to know that sound. It was the sound of pure terror. He mounted Belle and rode toward the tree line. The forest was thick with pine trees and underbrush. Fallen logs and boulders made riding difficult. Jack had to duck under low branches and guide Belle carefully around obstacles. The screaming grew louder as he got closer. Then Jack heard another sound that made his blood run cold. Howling. Not just one wolf, but several. A pack. And they were close to whoever was screaming. Jack kicked Belle into a faster pace, pushing through the trees as quickly as he dared. Branches grabbed at his clothes and hat. Thorns scraped his hands and face. But he kept going, following the sounds deeper into the forest. The howling was getting closer to the screaming. Jack knew what that meant. Wolves were smart hunters. They worked together to corner their prey. Once they had something trapped, they would move in for the kill. Jack had seen what wolves could do to a full-grown steer. A person, especially a child, would have no chance at all. Jack's heart pounded as he urged Belle forward. He pulled his rifle from its case and checked to make sure it was loaded. 6 shots. He hoped that would be enough. The trees began to thin out and Jack could see a small clearing ahead. The screaming was coming from there, and it was definitely a child's voice, a young boy calling out in what sounded like the Crow language. The howling was all around the clearing now, coming from at least 4 or 5 different directions. Jack reached the edge of the clearing and saw something that would stay with him for the rest of his life. In the center of the open space stood a dead tree, its bare branches reaching toward the sky like skeleton fingers. Halfway up the tree, clinging to a thick branch, was a small boy. He could not have been more than 8 or 9 years old. His dark hair hung in his face and his clothes were torn. He was crying and calling out, his small hands gripping the branch so tightly his knuckles were white. Around the base of the tree, 5 wolves paced in a circle. They were big animals, gray and black with yellow eyes and bared teeth. They had been hunting and they had found easy prey. The boy was trapped. If he climbed higher, the branch might break under his weight. If he came down, the wolves would tear him apart. Jack had never seen anything so terrifying or so heartbreaking. The child was probably from the Crow Reservation. He had somehow gotten separated from his family and wandered into the forest. Now he was going to die unless someone helped him. The wolves had not noticed Jack yet. They were focused completely on the boy in the tree. Their attention gave Jack a few precious seconds to think. He could try to scare them away with gunshots, but that might not work. Wolves were brave when they were hungry, and these animals looked like they had not eaten in days. He could try to shoot them all, but 6 bullets for 5 wolves was cutting it close. If he missed even once, or if there were more wolves he had not seen yet, both he and the boy could end up dead. But Jack did not have time for a better plan. The largest wolf, probably the pack leader, had started scratching at the trunk of the tree. He was trying to climb up after the boy. In a few minutes he might figure out how to reach him. Jack took a deep breath and made his choice. He would save this child no matter what it cost him. He had lived a good life and he had no family depending on him. But this boy had his whole life ahead of him. He deserved a chance to grow up, to have children of his own, to see what kind of man he would become. Jack raised his rifle and aimed at the largest wolf. The animal was big and dangerous, but he was also just trying to survive, just trying to find food for his pack. For a moment, Jack felt sorry for the wolves. They were not evil. They were just hungry. But the boy was innocent too, and he was in more danger. Jack squeezed the trigger. The shot echoed through the forest like thunder. The big wolf yelped and fell, blood spreading across his gray fur. The other wolves jumped back, startled and confused. They looked around wildly, trying to figure out where the danger was coming from. Jack kicked Bell forward, crashing into the clearing with his rifle ready. "Get back!" he shouted at the wolves. "Get back!" The wolves saw him now and they were angry. They had been close to an easy meal and this stranger had ruined everything. The dead wolf had been their leader and now they did not know what to do. Some wanted to run. Others wanted to fight. Jack fired again, aiming for the second largest wolf. His shot missed, but it came close enough to send the animal running for the trees. 2 wolves down, 3 to go. But his rifle only had 4 shots left. The boy in the tree had stopped screaming. He was staring down at Jack with wide, frightened eyes. He did not understand what was happening, but he knew that the man on the horse was trying to help him. The remaining 3 wolves spread out, trying to surround Jack and Bell. These were smart animals. They knew how to hunt as a team. Belle stamped her feet nervously. She could smell the wolves, and every instinct told her to run. But she trusted Jack, and she stood her ground. Jack knew he was in serious trouble. 3 wolves, 4 bullets, and a frightened child depending on him. He had to end this quickly, before the wolves figured out how to work together to bring him down. The closest wolf crouched low, ready to spring. Jack aimed carefully and fired. This time his shot was true. The wolf collapsed with a whimper. 2 wolves left, 3 bullets remaining. But the other wolves were learning to be afraid of the loud noises and the smell of gunpowder. They backed away, growling, but no longer eager to attack. Jack seized the moment. "Stay back," he yelled again, waving his hat in the air. "Get out of here!" The 2 surviving wolves looked at each other, then at their dead packmates, then at the strange man with the thunderstick. They had learned enough for one day. With final snarls of frustration, they turned and ran into the forest. Jack waited a full minute, listening for any sign that the wolves might come back. When he was sure they were gone, he looked up at the boy in the tree. "It's okay," he called out in English. "You're safe now." The boy did not understand the words, but he understood the gentle tone of Jack's voice. Slowly, carefully, he began to climb down from the tree. Jack watched the boy climb down slowly from the dead tree. The child's hands were shaking and his movements were careful and scared. Jack could see that he was hurt. There were scratches on his arms and face from the tree bark, and his shirt was torn in several places. But he was alive, and that was what mattered most. When the boy reached the ground, he stood very still and looked at Jack with wide, dark eyes. He was small for his age, probably no more than 8 years old. His black hair was messy and full of leaves and twigs. His clothes were made in the style Jack had seen Crow people wear in town. Simple pants and a shirt made from soft leather and cloth. Jack climbed down from Belle and approached the boy slowly. He did not want to frighten him any more than he already was. The child had just been through something terrible. The last thing he needed was to be scared of the person who had saved him. "It's all right," Jack said softly, holding his hands where the boy could see them. "I'm not going to hurt you." The boy did not understand English, but he could hear the kindness in Jack's voice. He took a small step backward but did not run. His eyes moved from Jack to the dead wolves and back again. He was trying to understand what had happened. Jack knelt down so he would not seem so tall and threatening. He pointed to himself and said, "Jack." Then he pointed to the boy and raised his eyebrows, asking a question without words. The boy understood. He pointed to his own chest and said something in the Crow language. It sounded like Little Bear, but Jack was not sure. He nodded and smiled, trying to show that he was friendly. Jack looked around the clearing and noticed something important. There were no adult footprints anywhere except his own. The boy had been alone when the wolves found him. But children from the reservation did not usually wander this far into the forest by themselves. Something must have happened to separate him from his family. The boy was shivering even though the day was not very cold. Jack realized he was probably in shock from the wolf attack. He needed warmth and comfort and safety. Jack took off his coat and held it out to the boy. At first the child backed away. He had been taught to be careful around white men. Many of them were not friendly to his people. But Jack's eyes were kind and he had just saved Little Bear's life. Slowly the boy reached out and took the coat. The coat was much too big for him. It hung down past his knees and the sleeves covered his hands completely. But it was warm and it smelled like leather and horses in the outdoors. Little Bear pulled it tight around his shoulders and felt a little bit safer. Jack stood up and looked around the forest. He needed to get the boy back to his family as quickly as possible. But first he had to figure out where the child had come from and how he had ended up alone in the woods. Jack pointed toward the east where the Crow reservation was located. "Home?" he asked. "Family?" Little Bear nodded and pointed in the same direction. Then he started talking rapidly in his own language, gesturing with his small hands. Jack could not understand the words, but he could guess what the boy was trying to tell him. He had gotten lost or separated from a hunting party or a family trip. He had wandered into the forest looking for the way home. The wolves had found him before he could find his way back. Jack looked at his horse. Belle was big and strong, but carrying 2 people would slow her down. Still, the boy was small and light, and Jack did not want to make him walk all the way back to the reservation. His legs were probably tired and weak from hanging onto the tree branch for so long. Jack led Belle over to a fallen log that he could use as a mounting block. He climbed up on the log and then onto Belle's back. Then he reached down and carefully lifted Little Bear up in front of him. The boy was nervous about being so high off the ground, but he did not struggle. "Hold on," Jack said, wrapping one arm around the boy to keep him secure. "We're going to find your family." Jack guided Belle out of the clearing and back through the forest toward his ranch. From there he could follow the river to the Crow reservation. It would take most of the afternoon, but it was the safest route. The forest was full of dangers. Wolves, bears, mountain lions, and deep ravines that could break a horse's leg. Jack knew the area well, but he did not want to take any chances with a child's life. As they rode, Jack thought about what he was doing. Taking a Crow child back to the reservation was risky. Many white settlers in the area did not trust the Native Americans. They thought any contact with them was dangerous. Jack could get in trouble with his neighbors for helping Little Bear. Some people might even think he was a traitor to his own race. But Jack did not care what other people thought. He had seen a child in danger, and he had done what any decent person would do. He had helped. It did not matter what color the boy's skin was or what language he spoke. What mattered was that he was safe now. Little Bear gradually relaxed as they rode. The gentle motion of the horse and the warmth of Jack's coat made him feel drowsy. He had been scared for so long that exhaustion was finally catching up with him. His head began to nod, and soon he was sleeping against Jack's chest. Jack looked down at the sleeping boy and felt something he had not experienced in years. A sense of purpose beyond just taking care of his ranch and his cattle. For a few hours, he was responsible for someone else's life, someone who trusted him completely, even though they had just met. The ride to the reservation took longer than Jack had expected. Little Bear woke up once when Belle stumbled over a rock, but he quickly fell asleep again. Jack began to worry that the boy's family was out looking for him. They were probably scared and desperate. Every minute that passed made their suffering worse. As the sun began to set, Jack finally saw smoke rising from cooking fires in the distance. The Crow village was just ahead, hidden in a valley beside the river. Jack had never been this close to it before. He had always respected the boundary between his land and theirs, but today was different. Today he had a good reason to cross that boundary. Jack rode slowly toward the village, watching for signs of people. He could see teepees and wooden buildings scattered along the riverbank, gardens with corn and squash and beans, horses grazing in a fenced area. It looked peaceful and well organized, nothing like the savage camps he had heard described in town. Then he heard shouting. People were running toward him from the village, men with painted faces and rifles, women crying and calling out. Jack realized they had spotted him, and they were not happy to see a white man riding toward their homes with one of their children. Jack stopped Belle and raised one hand in the air, the universal sign of peace. With his other arm, he kept Little Bear secure in the saddle. The boy had woken up and was looking around with excitement. He could see his home. The Crow warriors surrounded Jack and Belle, their weapons ready. They were angry and suspicious. In their language, they demanded to know what he was doing with their child. Jack could not understand their words, but their meaning was clear. Little Bear started talking rapidly in Crow, pointing at Jack and then back toward the forest. He was trying to explain what had happened, but the warriors were too upset to listen carefully. Jack stayed very still and kept his hand raised. He knew that one wrong move could get him killed. These people thought he had kidnapped their child. They had every right to be angry. Then an older man pushed through the crowd. His hair was gray and his face was lined with wrinkles, but his eyes were sharp and intelligent. He wore clothes that marked him as someone important in the tribe, a chief or an elder. The old man looked at Jack, then at Little Bear, then back at Jack. He spoke to the boy in a gentle voice, asking questions. Little Bear answered eagerly, his words tumbling over each other in his excitement to tell his story. As the boy spoke, the old man's expression changed. The anger left his face, replaced by surprise and then by something that might have been gratitude. When Little Bear finished talking, the old man stared at Jack for a long moment. Then he did something that shocked everyone, including Jack. He walked forward and placed his hand on Belle's neck. In careful but clear English, he said, "You saved my grandson's life." Jack looked down at the old man and saw tears in his ancient eyes. This was Little Bear's grandfather, and he understood exactly what Jack had done. The old man's words hung in the air like smoke from a sacred fire. Jack felt the tension around him change as the Crow warriors began to understand what had really happened. Their angry faces softened. Some lowered their weapons. Others stepped closer to get a better look at the white cowboy who had risked his life to save one of their children. "My name is Chief Running Wolf," the old man said in English that was slow but clear. "This boy is my grandson, Little Bear. Tell me what happened in the forest." Jack carefully helped Little Bear down from Belle before dismounting himself. The boy ran to his grandfather and wrapped his small arms around the old chief's legs. Running Wolf bent down and hugged the child, whispering words of comfort in the Crow language. "I was fixing fence near the woods when I heard screaming," Jack said simply. "Found the boy trapped in a tree with wolves all around. Drove them off with my rifle." Running Wolf translated Jack's words for the other tribal members who had gathered around them. As he spoke, their expressions changed from suspicion to amazement. Some of the women began to cry with relief. Warriors who had been ready to fight Jack moments before now looked at him with respect. Little Bear started talking again, his words fast and excited. He acted out the story with his whole body, showing how he had climbed the tree, how the wolves had circled below, how Jack had appeared like a hero from the old stories. The boy pointed at Jack repeatedly, and even though Jack could not understand the words, he could hear the admiration and gratitude in the child's voice. "He says you were like a great warrior from our legends," Running Wolf explained. "He says you fought 5 wolves with no fear, that you saved him when he thought he would die." Jack felt uncomfortable with the praise. "I just did what anyone would do," he said. The boy needed help. Running Wolf shook his head. Not anyone would ride into a wolf pack to save a child who was not their own. Not anyone would bring that child safely home. knowing they might be seen as an enemy. Around them, more people were arriving from the village. Word of what had happened spread quickly. Soon Jack was surrounded by dozens of Crow men, women, and children, all wanting to see the white man who had rescued Little Bear. An elderly woman pushed through the crowd, her face wet with tears. She reached for Little Bear and pulled him into a fierce hug. This was clearly his grandmother, and she had been terrified that she might never see him again. She spoke to Jack in Crow, her voice thick with emotion. "She thanks you for bringing her grandson home," Running Wolf translated. "She says you have given her family the greatest gift possible." Jack nodded to the woman, touched by her obvious relief and gratitude. He was beginning to realize that Little Bear's disappearance had affected the entire community. These people had been searching for the boy, fearing the worst. His safe return was cause for celebration for everyone. "How did he get lost?" Jack asked. Running Wolf spoke to Little Bear's grandmother, then turned back to Jack. "The boy went hunting with his older cousins this morning. They were tracking deer near the river. Little Bear saw a rabbit and chased it into the forest. When he tried to find his way back, he went deeper instead of toward home. The cousins searched for hours but could not find him. Jack could. Imagine how frightened the hunting party must have been when they returned to the village without Little Bear. And how desperate his grandparents must have felt as the hours passed with no sign of the boy. The wolves probably smelled him and followed his trail, Jack said. "Lucky I was working close enough to hear him calling for help." "It was not luck," Running Wolf said firmly. "It was the spirits watching over this child. They sent you to save him." Jack was not sure he believed in spirits, but he did not argue. He could see that faith was important to these people, and he respected that. The crowd around them was growing larger as more villagers arrived to see what was happening. Jack began to feel overwhelmed by all the attention. He was used to spending his days alone, talking to no one but his horse and his cattle. Being surrounded by so many people made him nervous. Running Wolf seemed to sense Jack's discomfort. He raised his hand and spoke to the crowd in Crow. Most of the people began to move away, though they continued to stare at Jack with curious and grateful eyes. "I told them to give you space," Running Wolf explained. "But first I must ask you something important. Will you stay and eat with us tonight? Let us honor what you have done?" Jack's first instinct was to refuse. He had delivered the boy safely home, and that was enough. He wanted to get back to his own ranch before dark. But something in Running Wolf's face made him reconsider. This was clearly more than just an invitation to dinner. It was a gesture of respect and gratitude that meant something special to these people. "I don't want to be any trouble," Jack said. "You would honor us by staying," Running Wolf replied. "And there are things we should talk about. Important things." Jack looked around at the faces watching him. He saw hope and curiosity and genuine warmth. These people were treating him like a hero, even though he had simply done what felt right. Maybe it would be rude to leave without accepting their hospitality. "All right," Jack said finally. "I'll stay for a while." Running Wolf smiled, and Jack could see the relief in his eyes. The old chief called out to the crowd, and suddenly everyone was moving with purpose. Women hurried toward cooking fires to prepare food. Men brought wood to build up the flames. Children ran back and forth, excited by the prospect of a celebration. "Come," Running Wolf said to Jack. "Let me show you our village properly." As they walked toward the center of the community, Jack was surprised by what he saw. The village was well organized and clean. The teepees were arranged in neat circles with space between them for families to gather and work. Gardens were laid out in careful rows with corn stalks standing tall and pumpkins growing fat on thick vines. Horses grazed in fenced areas, and he could see cattle in the distance. "You raise cattle too?" Jack asked. "Some," Running Wolf nodded. "We learned from our white neighbors. Some things about the old ways are good. Some things about the new ways are also good. A wise people take the best of both." Jack was impressed by this practical approach. He had expected the Crow to reject everything about white culture, just as many white settlers rejected everything about Indian culture. But Running Wolf seemed to understand that change was coming whether they liked it or not. The smart thing to do was adapt and survive. They stopped in front of a large teepee decorated with painted designs of eagles and horses and mountains. "This is my home," Running Wolf said. "Please sit." Jack sat cross-legged on a buffalo hide spread on the ground in front of the teepee. Running Wolf sat across from him. Little Bear's grandmother brought them both cups of water and plates of food. The boy himself sat between them, still wearing Jack's coat, looking proudly at his new hero. "Tell me about yourself," Running Wolf said. "How long have you lived on the ranch near our land?" 15 years, Jack replied. "I came here when I was young and stupid, thinking I'd get rich quick. Learned better pretty fast." Running Wolf chuckled. "The land teaches hard lessons, but it also gives great gifts to those who listen." They talked as the sun set and the cooking fires grew brighter. Jack found himself telling Running Wolf things he had never shared with anyone. About his early struggles on the ranch, about the loneliness of living alone, about his respect for the Crow people he had observed from a distance. Running Wolf, in turn, told Jack about his own life, about growing up in the days when his people could still hunt buffalo freely across the plains, about the changes that had come with the white settlers and the railroad, about his hopes and fears for his grandchildren's future. "Many of my people do not trust white men," Running Wolf said. "They have been lied to and cheated too many times. And many white men do not trust us. They think we are savages who will scalp them in their sleep." "I've heard the talk," Jack admitted. "But you are different," Running Wolf continued. "You risk your life for a child you do not know. You bring him home even though you know our warriors might kill you for being here. You show respect for our ways. This tells me much about your character." Jack felt embarrassed by the praise. "I just did what seemed right." "Yes," Running Wolf said. "Exactly. You did what was right, not what was easy or safe. That is the mark of a true man." As the evening went on, Jack found himself relaxing in ways he had not experienced in years. The food was good, the conversation was interesting, and the people around him treated him with genuine warmth. For the first time since arriving in Montana, he felt like he belonged somewhere. As darkness fell over the Crow village, the cooking fires grew brighter and the celebration began in earnest. Jack had never seen anything like it. Drums started beating in a rhythm that seemed to match the pulse of the earth itself. Men and women in colorful clothes began to dance around the fires, their movements telling stories without words. "This is a victory dance," Running Wolf explained to Jack. "We celebrate because Little Bear has returned to us safely. We celebrate because the enemy has become a friend." Jack watched in fascination as the dancers moved. Their steps were precise and meaningful, passed down through generations. Children joined in, learning the old ways from their elders. Even Little Bear participated, his small form dancing alongside his cousins, Jack's big coat still wrapped around his shoulders. "I should probably head home soon," Jack said. "It's getting late and I don't want to ride in the dark." Running Wolf shook his head. "The ceremony is not finished. There is something important that must be done first." Before Jack could ask what he meant, the drums stopped suddenly. The silence felt heavy and expectant. All eyes turned toward Running Wolf as he stood up slowly. The old chief walked to the center of the circle where the dancers had been moving. "My people," he said in English, speaking loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Tonight we honor a brave man who saved the life of one of our children." Running Wolf switched to the Crow language, repeating his words for those who did not understand English. Then he continued, his voice carrying clearly across the village. This white man could have ignored the cries for help in the forest. He could have decided it was not his problem. He could have been afraid of the wolves or afraid of us. But instead, he chose courage. He chose to help a child who needed saving. Jack felt uncomfortable being the center of attention. He started to stand up thinking he should say something, but Running Wolf gestured for him to stay seated. "Jack Morrison," the chief continued, "you have shown us that not all white men are our enemies. You have shown us that some men judge others by their actions, not by the color of their skin. You have shown us that courage and kindness exist in hearts of all races." Running Wolf walked over to where Jack was sitting. From somewhere in his clothes, the old chief produced a single eagle feather. It was beautiful, with brown and white markings that seemed to glow in the firelight. "In our tradition," Running Wolf said, "an eagle feather is given only to those who have performed acts of great bravery or wisdom. This feather comes from an eagle that soared high above our mountains. It represents courage, honor, and the connection between earth and sky." The chief held the feather out to Jack. "I give this to you not just as thanks for saving my grandson, but as recognition that you are a true friend to our people. From this day forward, you will always be welcome in our village. You will always have a place at our fires. You will always be considered one of our family." Jack stared at the feather in Running Wolf's outstretched hand. He had heard that eagle feathers were sacred to Indian tribes, that they were not given lightly. To receive such a gift was an enormous honor. "I can't take this," Jack said softly. "I don't deserve something so important." You do not get to decide what you deserve, Running Wolf replied with a gentle smile. That is for others to judge. And we have judged that you are worthy of this honor. With trembling hands, Jack reached out and accepted the feather. It was lighter than he had expected, but it seemed to carry the weight of centuries of tradition. The moment his fingers closed around it, the entire village erupted in cheers and applause. The drums started again, louder this time. More dancers joined the circle, including some of the older men who had been watching from the sidelines. Jack found himself being pulled to his feet by Little Bear, who was grinning from ear to ear. Dance with us, Running Wolf said. Tonight you are not a white man or a red man. Tonight you are simply a man who did what was right. Jack had never danced in his life, certainly not in front of other people, but the enthusiasm of the crowd was infectious. Little Bear took his hand and led him toward the fire. Soon Jack found himself moving awkwardly to the rhythm of the drums, trying to copy the steps he saw others doing. The Crow people laughed, but not in a mean way. They were laughing with joy, not at Jack's clumsy attempts to dance. Children ran around him in circles. Women sang songs in their ancient language. Men clapped him on the back and spoke words he could not understand but whose meaning was clear. As the night went on, Jack began to relax and enjoy himself. The dancing was exercise, but it was also something more. It was a way of expressing emotions that had no words. It was a way of connecting with other people without having to talk. It was a way of celebrating life and friendship and the bonds that could form between strangers. During a break in the dancing, an elderly woman approached Jack. She was bent with age, and her hair was completely white, but her eyes were bright and intelligent. She spoke to Running Wolf in Crow, gesturing toward Jack. This is my mother, Running Wolf explained. She is 93 years old and has seen many changes in her lifetime. She wants to tell you something. The old woman reached out and took Jack's hands in hers. Her skin was soft and wrinkled, but her grip was surprisingly strong. She spoke to him in Crow, her voice gentle but serious. She says she has lived through many wars between our people and yours, Running Wolf translated. She has seen much hatred and fear on both sides. But tonight gives her hope that future generations might find a better way to live together. Jack looked into the old woman's eyes and saw the wisdom of nearly a century of life. She had probably witnessed terrible things, moments when violence and prejudice had torn communities apart. But she had also lived long enough to see that change was possible, that people could choose understanding over fear. Tell her I'm honored by her words, Jack said. Running Wolf translated, and the old woman smiled. She patted Jack's cheek the way a grandmother might pat her own grandchild, then hobbled back to her seat near the fire. The celebration continued late into the night. Jack listened to stories about Crow history and legends. He watched children play games he had never seen before. He ate foods that were new to him but delicious. Most importantly, he talked with people who treated him not as an outsider but as a friend. Little Bear stayed close to Jack throughout the evening, still wearing the cowboy's coat. The boy had apparently decided that Jack was his personal hero, and he wanted to show him everything about his home. He took Jack to see the horses, pointing out which ones were the fastest and strongest. He showed him the garden where his grandmother grew corn and beans. He even tried to teach Jack a few words in the Crow language. He likes you very much, Running Wolf observed as they watched Little Bear chattering away in a mixture of Crow and broken English. He's a good kid, Jack replied, smart and brave. Most children would have panicked in that tree, but he kept his head and waited for help. He gets that from his grandfather, Running Wolf said with pride, and maybe from his new friend. As the fire began to die down and people started drifting back to their homes, Running Wolf walked Jack to where Belle was tethered. The horse had been well cared for during the evening, with fresh water and good grass to eat. Thank you for staying, Running Wolf said. This night has been important for our people. They needed to see that friendship between our races is possible. Thank you for having me, Jack replied. I learned more tonight than I have in 15 years of living alone. Running Wolf nodded thoughtfully. Loneliness is a choice, my friend. You do not have to make it anymore. Jack mounted Belle and looked down at the old chief. The eagle feather was tucked safely into his shirt pocket, where he could feel it close to his heart. What you did tonight, Jack said. Giving me that feather, treating me like family. It means more than you know. It is not what I did, Running Wolf corrected. It is what we did together. You saved a child. We honored your courage. You accepted our friendship. We welcomed you as a brother. None of it would have been possible without both sides choosing to trust. As Jack rode away from the village, he could hear the last echoes of drums and laughter drifting across the valley. He looked back once and saw the glow of the dying fires, the silhouettes of teepees against the starry sky, and the place where he had discovered that the world was bigger and more connected than he had ever imagined. Jack Morrison had gone to the Crow village to return a lost child. He was riding home as a changed man, carrying an eagle feather and the knowledge that he was no longer alone in the world. He had found something he did not even know he was looking for, a family that extended beyond the boundaries of race and culture, united by the simple recognition that courage and kindness were the same in any language. Jack rode home from the Crow village with his mind full of new thoughts and feelings. The eagle feather in his shirt pocket seemed to carry the warmth of the fires and the friendship he had found. For the first time in 15 years, he did not feel alone in the world. He had friends now, people who cared about him and respected him. But Jack's good mood did not last long. The next morning, as he went out to check on his cattle, he noticed something strange. One of his fence posts had a piece of paper nailed to it. Jack rode over to investigate and found a roughly written note that made his blood run cold. "Get out," the note said in large, angry letters. "No Indian lovers wanted here. Leave in 24 hours or face the consequences." The note was not signed, but Jack had a good idea who might have written it. Word traveled fast in the territory, and his visit to the Crow village had probably been noticed by someone. In a place where most white settlers lived in fear and suspicion of their Native American neighbors, Jack's friendship with Running Wolf and his people would be seen as betrayal. Jack crumpled up the note and threw it on the ground. He was not going to be scared away from his own land by anonymous threats. He had built this ranch with his own hands and his own sweat. No one had the right to tell him who he could be friends with or where he could go. But as Jack rode around his property that morning, he found 2 more threatening notes nailed to fence posts. Someone had been busy during the night making sure he got the message. The notes all said basically the same thing: leave or else. Jack tried to put the threats out of his mind and focus on his work. He had cattle to move and water troughs to repair, but he found himself looking over his shoulder more often than usual. He kept his rifle close at hand and listened carefully for sounds that did not belong. Around noon, Jack saw a rider approaching his ranch house. As the figure got closer, he recognized Tom Bradley, who owned a small spread about 10 miles to the south. Tom was one of the few neighbors Jack considered a friend. They had helped each other during difficult times, and Jack trusted him. But when Tom reached the house, his face was serious and worried. He dismounted and tied his horse to the porch rail without his usual cheerful greeting. "Jack," Tom said, "we need to talk." "Come on in," Jack replied, though he had a feeling he was not going to like what Tom had to say. They sat at Jack's kitchen table, and Tom looked uncomfortable. He kept turning his head in his hands and avoiding Jack's eyes. "I heard you went to the Indian village yesterday," Tom said finally. "Word travels fast," Jack replied. "Ben Hayes is saying you've gone over to their side," Tom continued. "He's telling people you can't be trusted anymore, that you're more loyal to the Indians than to your own kind." Jack felt anger rising in his chest. Ben Hayes owned the biggest ranch in the county and thought that gave him the right to tell everyone else how to live. Hayes had always been greedy for more land, and Jack suspected he had his eye on the Morrison ranch. "Hayes can say whatever he wants," Jack said. "I know what I did and why I did it. I saved a child's life. If that makes me disloyal to my own kind, then maybe my own kind needs to think about what loyalty really means." Tom nodded, but his expression remained troubled. "I understand why you did it, Jack. Any decent man would have done the same thing. But Hayes is stirring up trouble. He's got some of the other ranchers all worked up, talking about how dangerous it is to have Indians thinking they can trust white men." "What's that supposed to mean?" Jack asked. "Hayes is saying that if the Indians think they have white allies, they might get bold, start raiding again, or demand more land, or cause trouble for the settlements. He's convincing people that your friendship with them is a threat to everyone else's safety." Jack could hardly believe what he was hearing. "That's crazy talk. Running Wolf and his people are peaceful. They just want to be left alone to live their lives." "I know that, and you know that," Tom said. "But fear makes people stupid. And Hayes is real good at spreading fear when it serves his purposes." Jack leaned back in his chair and thought about the threatening notes he had found that morning. Now he understood where they had come from. Hayes was organizing opposition to him, turning the other settlers against him. How many people is Hayes talking to? Jack asked. More than I'd like, Tom admitted. He held a meeting at his place last night. Maybe 20 ranchers and townspeople showed up. They're calling themselves a safety committee, saying they need to protect the territory from Indian sympathizers. And what exactly are they planning to do about these sympathizers? Jack asked, though he was afraid he already knew the answer. Tom looked even more uncomfortable. Hayes is saying you need to be run out of the territory. He's telling people that as long as you're here, forming alliances with the Indians, nobody's family is safe. Jack stood up and walked to the window. Outside, his cattle grazed peacefully in the afternoon sun. This was his home, his life's work. The idea that he might have to abandon it because of Ben Hayes's lies and fear-mongering made him sick to his stomach. Are you with them? Jack asked without turning around. Hell no, Tom said emphatically. I told Hayes he was out of his mind. You're the most honest man I know, Jack. If you say the Indians are peaceful, I believe you. Besides, what you did for that child was right, and I won't stand with anyone who says different. Jack felt a surge of gratitude for his friend's loyalty. At least he would not be completely alone if trouble came. But I'm just one voice, Tom continued. Hayes has got most of the others convinced, and he's bringing in more people from outside the area. Men who don't know you, don't care about your character. Men who just see dollar signs when they look at your land. That was what this was really about, Jack realized. Hayes wanted his ranch, probably had wanted it for years. The incident with Little Bear had just given him an excuse to make his move. By painting Jack as an Indian sympathizer and a threat to the community, Hayes could justify driving him away and claiming his land. What's their plan? Jack asked. Tom hesitated before answering. They're giving you 48 hours to pack up and leave voluntarily. If you don't go, they're coming to make you go. How many men is Hayes planning to bring? Hard to say. Maybe 15 or 20 from the local area. But he sent word to other settlements too, calling for volunteers to help deal with the Indian problem. Could be 40 or 50 men by the time they're done gathering supporters. Jack turned away from the window and looked at his friend. Tom's face was full of worry and sympathy. He clearly hated being the messenger for such news. I'm not leaving, Jack said simply. I figured you'd say that, Tom replied. But Jack, you need to think about this carefully. That's a lot of men coming against you. Even if you're the best shot in the territory, you can't fight them all. Maybe not, Jack agreed. But I won't be run off my own land by a bunch of bullies and land grabbers. This ranch means everything to me. It's all I have. Tom stood up and put his hat back on his head. Is there anything I can do to help? Jack appreciated the offer, but he would not ask his friend to risk his own life and property. Just stay clear when the trouble starts. I don't want you getting hurt because of me. You sure about that? I'm pretty handy with a rifle. I'm sure, Jack said firmly. This is my fight. After Tom left, Jack spent the rest of the day preparing for what was coming. He cleaned his rifles and counted his ammunition. He moved his most valuable possessions to a secure hiding place. He made sure Belle was well fed and ready to travel fast if necessary. As the sun set, Jack found himself thinking about the eagle feather in his shirt pocket. Last night he had been welcomed as a brother by the Crow people. Tonight he was facing the possibility of losing everything because of that friendship. But Jack did not regret his choice. He had done the right thing by saving Little Bear, and he had been honored to be accepted by Running Wolf's people. If standing up for what was right cost him his ranch, then so be it. Some things were more important than land or money. Jack sat on his porch as darkness fell, his rifle across his knees, waiting to see what the next day would bring. In the distance, he could see the lights of other ranches scattered across the valley. Most of those lights belonged to people who now considered him an enemy. The thought made him sad, but it did not make him afraid. He had faced wolves to save a child. He could face whatever Ben Hayes and his followers threw at him. Jack Morrison was not the kind of man who ran from a fight, especially when he knew he was on the right side. But as he sat in the growing darkness, Jack could not help wondering if doing the right thing was always worth the price it demanded. Tomorrow would bring the answer to that question one way or another. Jack slept very little that night. Every sound made him alert and ready for trouble. The wind in the trees, an owl calling in the distance, his cattle moving around in the pasture. Everything seemed like it might be the beginning of an attack. He kept his rifle next to his bed and his boots on his feet, ready to jump up at the first sign of danger. But the attack did not come in the darkness. Ben Hayes and his men were not cowards, but they were not stupid either. They would want to see what they were doing when they came for him. They would wait for daylight. Jack rose before dawn and made coffee with shaking hands. He was not afraid exactly, but he was nervous about what was coming. 40 or 50 armed men against one lone cowboy were not good odds, no matter how good a shot he was. He walked out to the porch with his coffee cup and watched the eastern sky slowly turn from black to gray to pale yellow. This might be his last sunrise on the ranch he had built with his own hands. The thought made him sad, but it also made him angry. Ben Hayes had no right to steal a man's life's work just because he disagreed with his choices. As the sun crested the mountains, Jack heard the sound he had been dreading all night. Horses, lots of them, coming from the direction of Hayes's ranch at a steady pace. This was it. The confrontation he had been preparing for was about to begin. Jack picked up his rifle and checked to make sure it was loaded. He had decided not to hide inside the house like a trapped animal. Whatever happened, he would meet it standing upright on his own front porch, looking his enemies in the eye. The sound of horses grew louder. Jack could tell there were many riders, probably as many as Tom had predicted, more than he could hope to fight off even from the cover of his house, but he was not going to make it easy for them. Jack stepped to the edge of his porch and looked toward the main road that led to his ranch. In the distance, he could see dust rising from the hooves of many horses. The riders were still too far away to make out individual faces, but he could see that it was a large group moving toward him with obvious purpose. This was the moment when a smart man might run. Jack could saddle Bell and ride hard for the mountains, maybe make it to the Crow village and ask for shelter. But Jack Morrison was not a man who ran from his problems. He had never backed down from a fight in his life, and he was not going to start now. The dust cloud got closer, and Jack began to make out individual riders. There was Ben Hayes on his big black stallion, riding at the front of the group like a general leading his army. Behind him came other ranchers Jack recognized, along with men he had never seen before. Hired guns, probably, brought in from other territories to make sure Hayes had enough firepower to get the job done. Jack counted quickly as the riders approached. 43 men, all armed, all looking grim and determined. They spread out as they got closer to his ranch, forming a line that stretched across his entire front pasture. It was meant to be intimidating, and Jack had to admit it was working. The riders stopped about 50 yards from Jack's house, close enough to talk, far enough away to avoid being surprised by rifle fire. Hayes urged his horse forward a few steps, separating himself from the rest of the group. "Jack Morrison," Hayes called out in a loud voice. "You know why we're here?" "I know you want my land," Jack replied, his own voice carrying clearly across the distance between them. "I know you're using my friendship with the Crow people as an excuse to steal it. Your friendship with the Indians makes you a threat to every white family in this territory," Hayes shot back. "You've given them ideas about finding allies among our people. That kind of thinking leads to raids and massacres. The only people talking about massacres are you and your friends," Jack said. "Running Wolf and his people are peaceful. They just want to be left alone." "You're naive if you think that," Hayes said. "Indians are Indians. Give them an inch and they'll take a mile. Your little rescue mission has probably convinced them they can trust white men. That's dangerous thinking." Jack felt his anger rising. "Dangerous for who? For families trying to live their lives in peace, or dangerous for land grabbers who want to steal reservation territory?" Hayes's face darkened at the accusation, but he did not deny it. "You've got one last chance to do the right thing, Morrison. Pack up your belongings and get out of the territory. We'll give you a fair price for your cattle and you can start over somewhere else. And if I refuse?" Hayes gestured to the armed men behind him. "Then we'll do what needs to be done to protect our community from Indian sympathizers." Jack looked at the line of riders facing him. Some of them looked uncomfortable with what they were doing. Others seemed eager for violence. But all of them were there, ready to drive him from his home because Ben Hayes had convinced them it was necessary. "I'm not leaving," Jack said firmly. "This is my land, bought and paid for fair and square. You've got no legal right to force me out." "Law's a long way from here," Hayes replied. "Out here, right and wrong are decided by who's got the most guns." Jack raised his rifle, not pointing it at anyone but making it clear he was ready to fight. "Then let's get started." But before Hayes could respond, one of his men pointed toward the eastern horizon and shouted something Jack could not hear clearly. Hayes turned to look in that direction and his face went pale. Jack looked too, and what he saw took his breath away. Riders were coming from the east. Lots of them. They were still far away, but Jack could see that it was a huge group, much larger than Hayes's force. And as they got closer, Jack began to make out details that made his heart race with hope and amazement. These were not white settlers. These were Crow warriors painted for battle, carrying traditional weapons alongside modern rifles. They rode in perfect formation, their horses' hooves thundering against the prairie like war drums. And leading them on a magnificent white horse was Chief Running Wolf himself. The Crow riders did not stop when they reached the edge of Jack's property. They kept coming, spreading out as they approached until they formed a line that stretched all the way along Jack's fence line. Jack counted quickly and estimated there were at least 250 warriors, maybe more. Hayes and his men found themselves caught between Jack's house and a force of Crow warriors that outnumbered them 5-1. The settlers' horses began to prance nervously, sensing the tension in the air. Some of Hayes's men reached for their weapons, but others looked like they wanted to run. Running Wolf rode forward, stopping about 20 yards from Hayes's position. The old chief looked magnificent in his war paint and feathered headdress. His face was calm, but his eyes were hard as flint. "Ben Hayes," Running Wolf said in English that carried clearly across the field, "you have come to threaten our friend." Hayes tried to maintain his composure, but Jack could see the fear in his eyes. "This is not your concern, Chief. This is a matter between white men." "When you threaten a man who saved the life of my grandson," Running Wolf replied, "it becomes my concern. When you call him an enemy for showing kindness to our people, it becomes my concern. When you bring armed men to steal his land, it becomes my concern." Hayes looked around desperately at his followers. Many of them were already backing their horses away, clearly unwilling to fight such overwhelming odds. The hired guns he had brought in looked professional enough, but even they seemed to understand that this was not a battle they could win. "Jack Morrison is under the protection of the Crow Nation," Running Wolf announced. "Any man who harms him will answer to all of us." Little Bear rode up beside his grandfather on a small pony. He was wearing Jack's coat, which was still much too big for him, and he pointed at Jack with obvious pride. "He saved me from the wolves," Little Bear called out in English he had been practicing. "He is brave man." "Good man." Jack felt tears in his eyes as he realized what was happening. Word of Hayes's threat had somehow reached the Crow village, probably through the same network of communication that had spread news of Jack's rescue of Little Bear. And Running Wolf had decided to repay Jack's kindness by protecting him with the full might of his people. Hayes made one last desperate attempt to maintain control of the situation. "You're making a big mistake, Chief. This man has turned traitor to his own people. He can't be trusted." "I have seen this man's heart," Running Wolf replied. "He risks his life to save a child who is not his own. He brings that child home safely when he could have kept riding. He accepts our friendship when others would fear it. These are not the actions of a traitor. These are the actions of a true friend." The chief raised his voice so that all of Hayes's men could hear him clearly. "Let me tell you something about your friend, Jack Morrison. When he found my grandson in the forest surrounded by wolves, he did not stop to think about what color the boy's skin was. He did not worry about whether saving him would cause problems with his neighbors. He saw a child in danger and he acted. That is the kind of man he is." Running Wolf turned his horse to face Hayes directly. "Now you come here with guns and threats trying to steal his land because he showed kindness to my people. What does that say about the kind of men you are?" Several of Hayes's followers had already turned their horses around and were riding away. Others were looking uncertainly at their leader, clearly having second thoughts about the whole enterprise. The months following the confrontation with Ben Hayes brought changes that no one could have predicted. Word of what had happened at Jack Morrison's ranch spread quickly throughout Montana Territory and beyond. The story of a cowboy who saved an Indian child from wolves, and the hundreds of warriors who came to protect him in return, captured people's imagination in ways that surprised everyone involved. Newspaper reporters traveled from as far away as Denver and San Francisco to interview Jack and Running Wolf. They wanted to hear the story firsthand, to understand how such an unlikely friendship had developed and what it might mean for the future of the frontier. Some of the articles painted Jack as a hero. Others focused on the peaceful nature of the Crow people and their capacity for loyalty and honor. But the most important changes happened right there in the valley where Jack had built his ranch. Ben Hayes, humiliated by his failed attempt to drive Jack away, found himself increasingly isolated from his neighbors. Many of the men who had followed him that day began to question their own prejudices when they learned more about what had really happened between Jack and the Crow village. Tom Bradley was one of the first to visit the Crow reservation, bringing his wife and children to meet Running Wolf and his family. Other ranchers followed, cautiously at first, then with growing confidence as they discovered that their fears had been based on ignorance rather than reality. It's amazing how different people seem when you actually talk to them. Tom told Jack one day as they watched their children play together near the river that separated their lands. Tom's youngest daughter had become fast friends with Little Bear, and the two of them chattered away in a mixture of English and Crow that delighted both their families. Trade relationships began to develop between the white settlers and the Crow village. The Native Americans had skills in hunting, tracking, and surviving harsh winters that proved valuable to their new neighbors. The settlers, in turn, had access to manufactured goods, medical supplies, and farming techniques that could benefit the reservation. Jack found himself serving as an unofficial ambassador between the two communities. His friendship with Running Wolf gave him credibility with the Crow people, while his reputation as an honest and hardworking rancher earned him respect among the white settlers. When disagreements arose, both sides often turned to Jack to help find solutions. One such disagreement came in the spring, when a group of young Crow men were accused of stealing cattle from a ranch near the reservation border. The rancher, a newcomer to the area named William Stevens, was ready to call in the territorial authorities and demand justice. But Jack convinced him to let the matter be handled through discussion rather than confrontation. "Give me a chance to talk to Running Wolf," Jack had said. "If his people took your cattle, he'll make it right. And if they didn't, we'll figure out what really happened." The meeting between Stevens, Jack, and Running Wolf took place at Jack's ranch house, chosen as neutral ground that both sides could accept. Stevens was nervous about sitting down with an Indian chief, but Running Wolf's dignity and careful English soon put him at ease. "My young men did not take your cattle," Running Wolf said after listening to Stevens's accusations. "But I understand why you might think they did. There have been problems with wild animals and rustlers in that area. Let us work together to find the real cause." A joint search party of white ranchers and Crow trackers found the missing cattle 3 days later, trapped in a box canyon after running away during a thunderstorm. The Crow trackers' superior knowledge of the land had made the difference, and Stevens was embarrassed by his quick assumption that the Native Americans were to blame. "I owe you an apology," Stevens told Running Wolf when the cattle were safely returned. "No apology is needed," the chief replied, "but perhaps next time you will ask questions before making accusations." Such incidents became teaching moments for both communities. The white settlers learned that their Crow neighbors were honest and trustworthy. The Crow people learned that not all white men were enemies bent on stealing their land. Slowly, carefully, a new kind of relationship began to develop. Jack's ranch became a meeting place where members of both communities felt welcome. Running Wolf would often stop by when he was traveling in the area, and Jack always had coffee ready and time to talk. White ranchers learned that they could visit the Crow village without fear, and many developed genuine friendships with Native American families. Little Bear, now grown taller and more confident, became a symbol of the new cooperation. He spent time learning English from Jack while teaching the cowboy more of the Crow language. The boy's natural charm and intelligence won over even the most skeptical white settlers, proving that the next generation might be able to build bridges their parents had never imagined. "He's going to be a leader someday," Jack told Running Wolf as they watched Little Bear explaining the finer points of horse training to a group of fascinated ranch children. "He already is," Running Wolf replied. "Every time he speaks to your people without fear, every time he shows them that we are just human beings like themselves, he is leading us toward a better future." As the years passed, the valley became known throughout the territory as an example of what was possible when people chose cooperation over conflict. Government officials visited to study the peaceful relationship that had developed between the white settlers and the Crow reservation. Some tried to replicate the model in other areas with varying degrees of success. Jack continued ranching for 30 more years, but his role gradually expanded beyond simply raising cattle. He served on committees that mediated disputes between different communities. He helped establish schools where white and Native American children could learn together. He even convinced the territorial government to hire Crow scouts and guides for their official expeditions. Ben Hayes never recovered from the humiliation of his failed attempt to drive Jack away. His ranch struggled financially as other settlers chose to do business with more trustworthy neighbors. Eventually, he sold his land and left the territory, muttering about how the world had gone crazy when white men started treating Indians like equals. "Good riddance," Tom Bradley said, when news of Hayes's departure reached the community. Some people never learn that hatred is more expensive than friendship. Jack's friendship with Running Wolf deepened over the years. The two men aged together, sharing stories and wisdom across the cultural divide that had once seemed impossible to cross. When Running Wolf's health began to fail in his 80s, Jack was one of the few white men invited to participate in the sacred ceremonies that marked the chief's final days. "You have been more than a friend," Running Wolf told Jack during one of their last conversations. "You have been a bridge between two worlds that needed to find each other." "You taught me that courage isn't just about facing wolves," Jack replied. "Sometimes it's about facing your own fears and prejudices." Little Bear, now a grown man with children of his own, inherited much of his grandfather's wisdom and all of his gift for building relationships. He became the unofficial liaison between the reservation and the surrounding white communities, a role that would have been unimaginable before Jack's rescue of him in the forest. "Everything started when you saved that boy," people would say to Jack in later years. "You changed the whole territory with one act of kindness." But Jack always disagreed with that assessment. "I didn't change anything," he would say. "I just did what felt right." The change came when people on both sides decided to trust each other instead of living in fear. The eagle feather that Running Wolf had given Jack remained one of his most treasured possessions. He kept it in a place of honor in his house, and visitors often asked to hear the story behind it. Jack never grew tired of telling that story, because he understood its importance as a reminder of what was possible when people chose to see each other as human beings rather than enemies. As Jack grew older, he began to worry about what would happen to the relationships he had helped build. Would the next generation continue the work of cooperation, or would old prejudices return when the people who remembered the early days were gone? His fears proved largely unfounded. The children who had grown up playing together across racial lines became adults who saw cooperation as natural rather than revolutionary. They married across cultural boundaries, started businesses together, and raised their own children to value diversity rather than fear it. The valley that had once been divided by suspicion and hatred became a model of what the American West could be at its best. Not a place where might made right, but a community where people of different backgrounds could build something better together than any of them could create alone. Jack Morrison lived to be 73 years old, dying peacefully in his sleep during the winter of 1928. His funeral was attended by hundreds of people, both white and Native American, who came to pay their respects to a man who had shown them that courage and kindness could change the world. Little Bear, now Chief Little Bear of the Crow Nation, spoke at Jack's funeral. His words were simple but powerful. "This man saved my life when I was a child, but more than that, he saved all of our lives by showing us how to live together in peace."